Welcome everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. This is Trisha Jones-Parkin, and I'm the Program Manager for the Employment and Community Integration Technical Assistance Center. And today we are being educated by Kate McConaughey, Brian Hart, and Cassidy Thomas. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I wanted to just kind of set the tone for this particular webinar, and then also if you joined us last time. In terms of transformation, I think it's really important to share providers' journey through the process, not just what seems to be magic at the end. And I really appreciate the team here at Work Activity Center being willing to share their journey, the highs, the lows, and all the things, because I think everybody can learn from that. So I'm going to turn the time over to them, and please use the chat box for questions. We should have time at the end, and I will also be sharing a link to a survey and follow up with an email. Your feedback's really important. Okay, thank you.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar today. I'm Kate McConaughey. I am the director of the Work Activity Center, and I've been with the center now for over, for almost 19 years. So I've seen a lot of changes over that time frame. None probably quite as much as our transformation, some of the transformation things that we have been involved in recently, but I'm not going to talk a lot about those today. I'll leave that to Cassidy Thomas, who's been our Employment Services Coordinator, and Brian Hart, our Director of Program Development, to kind of talk a little bit more about what we've been doing transformation-wise. What I would like to start by talking to you all about is who is the Work Activity Center, because I think every provider's transformation journey is best served when it's done with a nod to the population that is being supported through the services that are being provided. And so I just want to share a little bit about the Work Activity Center, kind of our history, and what's important to us and why that's a little important to us as we go. So the Work Activity Center has been providing services since 1958. So we've been doing it for more than 60 years. And as you can see there, initially our start was with children, as the little slide down in the corner. We were formed by a group of parents who were desiring social, recreational, and educational outlets for their children. And the drive to begin the Work Activity Center, even though we weren't called that back in the day, really grew up from parents wanting their children, even though those children had disabilities, to experience life in a similar fashion as their non-disabled neighbors, other children that were in that family. And so a lot of their activities were based more in what you would typically experience if you did not have the disability. But of course, over time, those children were shuttled off to school. In the 70s, when public school options became available for those children, the Work Activity Center faced a decision. Do we stop what we're doing or do we shift? And we decided to shift to adults. And the other corner represents sort of our first group of adults that joined us back in those days. And some of those individuals, as we were preparing this picture today, we all kind of laughed because we recognized many of them. Many of them are still with us today. And then in the 1980s, we decided to shift again from just day services to offer supported employment, as well as to offer some residential services. So you can see this theme over the years of shifting the way we deliver services to meet the needs of the people. And the reason we make these shifts, I think more than anything else, is we truly remain a mission-focused company. Our mission is to enrich the lives of people with disabilities by actively providing opportunities for independence and individual growth. And you can tell from that mission statement that we are all about helping the individuals that we have the pleasure of spending our days with to become as independent as they possibly can. And everything that we do at the Work Activity Center is focused around achieving those outcomes. And before I turn the time over to Cassidy to talk a little bit more about how we did some of the initial transformation and to walk you through where we are today, I want you to understand a little bit about our population, because like all providers, excuse me, we have some unique individuals. We have about 150 individuals that receive services. More than half of those individuals experience both intellectual as well as physical disabilities, and so we have a lot of individuals who require the use of a mobility aid to get around. About a third of those require full assistance with feeding and personal hygiene. About a third require some assistance with feeding and personal hygiene, and about 20 require pretty much full care. So we have a rather complex individuals in terms of some of their support needs. But if you go back to that 150, we have about 74 who receive employment services, and that is the group that we initially started the transformation with. But as Cassidy will talk about, that transformation has now transfused throughout the entirety of the services that we provide. 74 receive activity-based day services, and about 40 receive residential services. So why did we decide to transform? You can probably tell, like many providers out there, we have our hands full on a day in and day out basis, just meeting the needs, the everyday needs of those that we support. But again, I want to return to our decision to transform, and we were one of the first two providers to kind of say we want to transform here. Part of it is it helps us stay true to our mission. As I shared with you earlier, we have been changing since the day we were formed, and the changes have always been in response to a drive to better serve those that seek our services. We want to get good outcomes for people, as I'm sure most providers do, and sometimes we may debate about how do we achieve those good outcomes, but the dedication to achieving them is always at the core of what we do. And again, our mission is to have more opportunities, and so our decision to transform it ticked all the boxes for us in terms of being more community-based in the way we deliver our services. And so we raised our hands and said, we want to do this to achieve these outcomes. And we have received and achieved some really great outcomes for our folks. We've had a few drawbacks, as you can imagine, and setbacks, but overall, we've seen some great outcomes that have arisen from the way we now deliver services. And so I want to turn the time over to Cassidy Thomas, because he's been the one who has been kind of at the forefront of getting these services going. So Cassidy?
Thank you, Kate. So as Kate said, my name is Cassidy, and I've been the Employment Services Coordinator here at the Work Activities Center, and I've been helping oversee the development and implementation of these new services that we've been pursuing. So as Kate discussed, we got to this point in about 2017 where we saw a need for our company to evolve in a way that utilized more community-based services. And at the time when we had this realization, we really had very little infrastructure for such a program in place. We really did need to build this program from the ground up, and what this meant is that we needed to first identify or find potential staff. We needed to develop completely new community partnerships and activities, and we had to amend some of our daily procedures. And for companies or organizations that find themselves in this position, it can be very daunting. There's a lot of legwork that goes into these initial building processes. The first part of this was identifying the resources that we had on hand and finding our strengths and building off of those. And we had a program manager who assisted us very much at the initial phases of this program. We identified her to sort of head up the initial startup of this program based off of her experience managing community-based enclave work sites. So she had considerable experience discussing our programs and our mission with community stakeholders, and that is a very vital skill for anyone promoting or constructing a community-based program. Now, one thing that's important to state right off the bat is that the amount of time and energy that it takes to develop these brand new community partnerships really should not be underestimated, but it does become a lot easier with time as you start to build this network of community partners and references. The second key person that we identified was direct care staff, who would sort of be our feet on the ground for the community engagement program. At the time, we didn't have a community-based program like this going on, so we didn't have staff who had a lot of experience doing what we wanted this program to be. But we did have a staff who had over a year and a half of experience driving wheelchair-accessible vehicles, very big coach-like UTA vehicles, familiarity with our local public transportation system, and she was also a very excellent data taker while she worked at our center-based programs. And that's also a very important skill to emphasize early on in this process, because this data was invaluable for us early on, really learning how our individuals responded to these different community-based activities, and learning what activities worked, what sort of procedures worked. That data taking in that process was very important for us, because it allowed us to really step back and evaluate 8-10 months down the road how we were doing and how we wanted to evolve further going into the future. So once we had those two key players identified, it became a question of how we wanted to operate this program initially. And for us, based on the resources we had, a hub and spoke model made the most sense initially. And by hub and spoke, what I mean is a model where all of the clients still start and end their day at the center. So they were coming on their usual UTA transportation, and then they were meeting, our staff would meet them at our center, and then get a coach or get a van and head out for the day to do their activity. And this model has several advantages. First, it is usually much more comfortable for a lot of the clients and their families initially. It's much easier to get some buy-in from our clients and their families by still being able to have a consistent start and end place that they were already comfortable with. Second, it made this program accessible to a much wider range of individuals, a much wider range of our clients who had, some of them who had much more substantial support needs, oftentimes medical or hygienic or also behavioral needs. That being said, the hub and spoke model still does have some challenges and drawbacks. A couple of those main ones being that with having this model, all of our individuals kind of at the beginning of the day, especially since the center was something they were comfortable with, a lot of them would sometimes show up at the center and they would immediately get back into their old routine and they wouldn't want to go. So they would show up at the center, they'd start working, they'd start participating in activities at the center, and they wouldn't want to leave for the community activity when it became time. Naturally, you also do lose some of your community-based time because you have your morning transportation to the center, and then it takes a little while for our staff to get there, and then it takes a little time to kind of rally the group and head out to the engagement program. And that's all time that we're losing that they could be spending in the community. Early on, we knew that we wanted this to really get this program, this community engagement program, to give our individuals a very wide range of opportunities. We started by housing this program out of our existing employment services department, and naturally we wanted some of our activities to be employment oriented, really allowing our individuals to explore different skill sets and work-like activities that we aren't necessarily able to provide through center-based services. But we also wanted them to take some of the skills that they developed in our center-based program and apply them to new contexts. That was also part of this. In addition to those employment-oriented activities, however, we also wanted to get a good mix of recreational activities, community-based educational opportunities, life skills activities, and cultural events happening around the Valley. And this is an example of on the slide, this is an example of a weekly schedule of activities we had very early on in our community engagement program, during the first month actually. And you can see that we have some work-oriented activities with the local homeless shelter called the Road Home, where we were helping sort clothes and manage donations. Those experiences were followed with more leisurely recreational activities like visiting the Clark Planetarium. You can also see some volunteer activities at the food bank and some arts events at the local Liberty Park. Now it's important to note that while some of these are more leisurely activities, they're still meaningful in the sense that we're still working on a lot of those soft skills and those social skills and helping our individuals really learn how to navigate different social social and community spaces that they don't get exposed to if they're just in a purely center-based program. And we continued along this path, doing activities like this for a considerable amount of time, about 8 months. And around that time, as we got into the summer, we stepped back and wanted to kind of collect ourselves, and we made some observations about where we were. And one observation related to how we were choosing these activities that we were participating in. When we first started the program, we were really focused on helping our individuals get the widest variety of experiences possible. We wanted to get them involved in as many new places and try as many new activities as possible. And for some, this was enjoyable, but for others, this didn't have as positive an impact because it wasn't really allowing them to actually be included in the community. And this goes back to this difference between integration and inclusion. They didn't actually feel like they were being an active part of an organization or a space when we were doing a bunch of these one-off activities. Even though we were getting a very wide variety of experiences, they weren't truly included in that space. And they weren't developing the natural supports in those spaces. And so what we realized was that moving forward, we wanted a mix of opportunities that we could engage regularly, because this was what allowed our individuals to really become included into a community space. And in the context of employment-oriented activities, doing so would allow our individuals to really repeatedly engage a volunteer activity at a local nonprofit on a week, for example, at a local nonprofit on a weekly basis. And that, when you're talking about technical work skills, that allowed them to really master, really become familiar with these new work skills that they didn't have experience with before, which is something that we were lacking early on in our community engagement program. And socially, in addition to the technical strengths that they're gaining, it really allowed them to gain invaluable experience in developing healthy and appropriate relationships with the people in the community, sometimes in this work-like environment. When we had a bunch of these more one-off activities, they didn't really get the chance to develop those technical and social skills. And so from this point moving forward, we tried to balance our weekly schedules with a mix of these recurring opportunities, these recurring activities, with a day or two of some one-off activities where they got a little bit more of that variety. So moving forward, one other realization, sorry, we skipped ahead one too many slides. One other realization that we had kind of during this 8-10 month mark was this community engagement program was able to serve a very wide range of purposes for the different individuals that we served. And so for some of our individuals who had never been outside of a day program before, who were very used to this traditional day program model, this program had the potential to serve a very important exploratory role in their lives, allowing them to explore new skills and passions, kind of what we were talking about a second ago. For others, especially for some of our older folks who didn't necessarily have community-based employment goals, and these are individuals who, some of them might have worked a community-based job in the past, but because of their age and their health, they were more comfortable with kind of a day program, or they kind of become more comfortable with a day program. For those individuals, this program still served as a mechanism for them to be involved with their local community through recreation and volunteerism rather than spending their days in a traditional day program or a 24-hour residential site. And then for others, some of those individuals who are on the cusp of community employment, who are in a day program or at an enclave site, this program served as a really important resume builder for them. Again, being able to engage a recurring opportunity at a nonprofit or with a city department and learning these new technical work skills, that was a really important resume builder. For some of them, a final step before they got that one-on-one job placement in the community. And one thing that's very unique about the Work Activity Center is, again, the very wide range of services that we provide, including residential, the traditional day program, center-based employment, enclave work sites, community job placement services. And what we found is that this program really had a role to play in the lives of our individuals throughout all those programs. This program really transcended all the many different departments and services that we already provided. So moving forward, we made some changes, again, how we approached developing some of these opportunities, again, getting that mix of recurring opportunities and also some variety still. And we saw some really awesome growth in several of our clients. And one individual that I wanted to take a second to talk to as kind of an example was this gentleman, Todd. And so Todd, when we were at the very beginning of this program, when we were starting it up, his parents were very hesitant to getting him out into the community and participating in this program. And for the first little bit, he was himself very hesitant. He would go home on a nightly basis complaining about the program, saying he hated going out into the community. That being said, we saw an interesting dynamic where he was going home and reporting that. But when we were at the center at the beginning of the day and we had him scheduled to go out, he was very insistent that he wanted to go. So there was an interesting disconnect. He wanted to go and he wanted to be involved, but clearly what we were doing was at first was not resonating with him. He wasn't feeling included, and we saw this at the activities. Again, this goes back to where the data taking is very important, because we were seeing with him, and it was being communicated to us, that we were going out on these activities, and he just wasn't involving himself. As you can see in the photo, this is usually what the days looked like for him. He would have his hood up. He wouldn't necessarily be a part of the group. He wouldn't be a part of the volunteer activity or a part of the, whatever we were doing that day. But when we started changing our approach to how we developed these opportunities and got some more recurring activities in there, we actually saw a lot of success, and we started to see some changes within Todd. Our first minor success came with a local nonprofit called the Green Urban Lunchbox. And this was one of the first recurring opportunities that this individual engaged on a weekly basis. And he didn't actually enjoy the volunteer aspect of it that much, but this was the first one. But what happened was he started to develop a natural support at that location. Even though he didn't enjoy the volunteer activity, he actually developed a really strong friendship with the staff that we were working with at the nonprofit. And he actually also developed a very close relationship with the staff's cat that was at the nonprofit. And so every day, every Friday, he was insistent that he wanted to go, and he was looking forward to going. He was enjoying going. Again, he didn't necessarily enjoy the volunteer activity, but he would show up. He would love to say hi to the staff. He would just hang out with the cat, and he would have an awesome time with the cat. So again, we saw with this recurring activity that he actually enjoyed that space, and he was very capable of developing that natural community support. And then our second success with Todd came with the library, and where we were engaging a couple activities at the local library, and we discovered that he had this fascination he had some reading skills, we knew that, but he loved reading graphic novels, and he loved reading. And so what we saw there was he had this passion for reading, and he did very well with these recurring activities, and so we combined those two things, and we started engaging this place called the Next Chapter Book Club. And this is a weekly book club that happened every Mondays. And again, when Todd first showed up, he was very hesitant to become involved. And this is because it was a new space. And we needed to have this recurring activity because he needs time to develop those natural supports and that comfortability in that space. And what we saw is after about a month of being in this space where there's something going on that he's passionate about, again, when we first got there, it was hoodie over the head in the corner. It takes place in the local coffee shop. And he would refuse to participate with the book club. He wouldn't even sit with the group, wouldn't read. If you asked him to join, occasionally it would lead to kind of a shouting episode in the middle of the coffee shop. But with time, again, he started to develop those natural supports. And as you can see here in the photo, after about a month and a half, 2 months, he became an active participant in this book club, which many of the staff, myself included, had never seen him really do this before. Like him with the hood off, conversing, turning his hearing aid on. He's a hard of hearing individual, and a lot of the times he just turns his hearing aid off because he doesn't have an interest in communicating. But he was being an active participant, and this was a really awesome progression to see in Todd. And later on, the important thing too is this confidence carries over into some of these other spaces. You can see here a couple other activities where he has his hood off and he's actively participating. This is just a recreational event on the left where we were at a local kind of water park. And you can see he has his hoodie off and he's participating with community members. These are community members, not members of our program. And then on the right, again, you can see his hoodie off. He's engaged. He's engaging in this puzzle, this sort of problem-solving activity at this local museum, this exhibit that we were visiting. And 6 months prior to this, a year prior to this, this was very rare for him. We wouldn't see behavior like this. And so based on some of these really great results that we were seeing with this small tweak that we made in the hub and spoke model that we were operating, we wanted to kind of take the next step with our community engagement program. And again, going back to our mission is to enrich the lives of people with disabilities by actively providing opportunities for independence and individual growth. And in order to really facilitate that independence and growth, we felt that like we needed to give it more space. And what that really meant is that we needed to take the leap and take the center-based component out of the question and open up our program and completely have it based out of in the community. And to revisit some of the challenges with the hub and spoke model again, it really leads some of our individuals. For some of our individuals, they'll show up at the center, but then they don't want to go out. And so we were still dealing with some of those challenges from the hub and spoke model. And we really felt that considering the challenges, some of those challenges that we're still seeing, plus our mission and the way we wanted to continue to evolve as the way that we wanted our services to continue evolving, we knew that we had to expand to be a wholly community-based operation. Meaning, again, that our individuals don't set foot in the center throughout the day. And this presents a whole new set of challenges and considerations. First off, how are we going to determine our client groups? How big are these groups going to be? Who comprises these groups? How do we facilitate and manage transportation for these individuals? And lastly, how do we make sure that all these activities that they engage are truly meaningful? And we wanted to make sure that our services were person-centered, and we wanted to ensure that these activities related to their interests and passions. And we weren't just helping our individuals go out into the community, but they were actually, and we weren't just providing them with the activities that we had available, but we were actually finding activities that really related to their passions and their interests as a person. And so how do we go about doing all these things? When determining client groups, a couple of things that we did was we wanted to keep the client groups small, and we do that for a couple of reasons. First, when you have these smaller groups of individuals that are 3 to 4 individuals, that makes them much more approachable. It makes it much easier for them to truly become included in a space, as opposed to when you have a group of like 8 individuals. When there's a group of 8, they tend to just stick with themselves. They don't tend to branch out. They tend to kind of gravitate towards their peers. Their peers that they already know and that they're comfortable with. But if you make the group much fewer people, it can kind of encourage them to branch out and, again, start developing some of those friendships and those relationships with those individuals in the community. And so that's 3 individuals generally plus 1 support staff. And then from there, look into client histories, look into their likes, their dislikes, their passions. Residential teams, family members can be great resources, as well as old documents from their many years in services if they've had a long service history. And so what we found was that we had a group of individuals. We had some individuals that loved animals, and so we pursued opportunities at the Humane Society for them. We had individuals who their family brought up that many years ago in a past life they had actually worked in a kitchen, and they loved working in a kitchen. They loved working with food, and they loved working with the people at a kitchen. And so we pursued an opportunity at the Ronald McDonald House where they could work in the kitchen at the Ronald McDonald House. We have lots of individuals who like to be outside and don't like to be in a building, which Nashua, I don't think a lot of us like to spend our whole day in a building. But these people really like to be outside and be in parks and be in areas with a lot of nature. And so we started working with our local Parks and Recreation department and finding opportunities for them to assist with some work at a park. When looking at transportation, again, this is where the concept of balancing the levels of support and services that your individuals need really comes into play. And what we mean by that is, again, when you're having a group of like 3 individuals, combining an individual who requires more services with an individual who is a little bit more independent. And this is especially important when you're considering transportation. And so with one of our initial groups, we had an individual who was very high functioning. He had some experience on public transportation many years ago, and he was already familiar with kind of frequenting the community around his house. And so we took that individual and we paired them with another individual who was deaf, nonverbal, who didn't have any experience on public transportation. And what that allowed us to do is to get one of our individuals up to speed on public transportation very quick to where they were able to use public transportation independently. And then we could provide most of our services and support to the other individual in that group who needed much more support in that area. And then lastly, it's also very important to clearly identify desired outcomes for each one of these recurring activities. We developed these 2 this is the map. I skipped ahead, but you can see here, we were considering geographical location also for our clients, and you can't really see it on here, but this is our public transportation system in the Salt Lake Valley. And the Humane Society, which is one of these recurring activities that we identified for our 3 individuals who had this affinity for animals, they were all within about a 20-minute public transportation ride of the Humane Society. And so that was also part of what went into our decision or our decision to propose this opportunity to these particular individuals because it was close to them. Again, it related to one of their passions, and they were able to potentially ride public transportation to this location. And so then, again, going back to, this is an example of kind of a current schedule that we have. And so you can see on here some of those activities we were talking about, where we have the Humane Society on Mondays and Thursdays. We have Tuesdays and Wednesdays where they're going to the Ronald McDonald House. And then on Fridays is that Salt Lake City Adopt a Spot program with the Parks and Recreation Department. And you can see here in gray, this is actually still our hub and spoke group. And so we're still operating that model simultaneously. So this was an expansion. We weren't swapping out one program for another. And the reason why we still want to operate both those programs is because, again, the hub and spoke model still does serve as good entry for some of our individuals into that community-based program, or into that community-based service, because that is what some of them are more comfortable with at first. And that's what's more accessible for some of our individuals at first. And then going back to clearly identifying desired outcomes for our individuals and making sure that these outcomes are, that these activities are meaningful. These are two forms that we developed to help us manage these activities and ensure that the true purpose and meaning of our community engagement is not lost in the process of all this. So here on the left is just and these forms are very simple, relatively speaking. One on the left is just one for a program manager and for a support staff to fill out prior to an activity, where they're describing the activities and tasks that they're going to be engaging in. Again, the proposed number of participants, and then down there about halfway through the page, you see that box that has the client individual, ask the staff to identify a couple potential clients who, again, have an interest or passion in this area, and then again, what is a specific objective related to that activity? Because most of these recurring activities, they might occur for about 2 to 6 months. And so in 6 months, what is an objective that we can, a challenging but attainable objective that we can have for this individual that clearly relates to their goal and their support? And on this document on the right, we go into a little bit more in-depth into, again, how does that objective relate to that individual's goal and support strategy that we are reporting to the state and reporting to their teams. Because in the state of Utah, we have PCSPs where we, on an annual basis, revisit the individual's annual goal and how are we going to support them in getting past those barriers and reaching that goal. And so this document on the right takes that goal and that support and again looks at the activity that we're going to be participating in, identifying an objective that relates to that activity, and figuring out how we're going to support our individual in that activity to reach that objective. It's kind of a mini support strategy within a support strategy, if that makes sense. And so with one of our first groups, as I was talking about, we identified some of our individuals. We had a group of 3, and the Humane Society was one of the first groups that we kicked off the ground. And when we were putting this group together, again, we were looking to balance our services, balance the level of services that were needed in the group. And so we had one individual, as I previously mentioned, that had some prior experience on public transportation. He's more high functioning. He's very good at communicating with individuals throughout the community. And him and his brother, who he lives with, both had experience kind of frequenting the community around their house. They weren't usually getting on public transportation or going long distances, but they would frequently walk their dogs around the house. They knew they kind of had some experience with developing supports with their neighbors and, shops on the corner, things like that. And so we coupled those two with one of our individuals who, like I previously mentioned, was hard of hearing, much more timid, didn't have nearly as much experience in the community, and also who had a caretaker situation where they were much more hesitant to allow him to participate in this program than these other 2 individuals. And that's another thing to kind of consider. Not only are you kind of balancing this level of services that you're looking to provide to these individuals, but you also kind of have to balance the situations you're going to have to manage with the caretakers and the families. In this situation, we had one family member who was completely all on board right off the bat. Very easy to convince them that this was the right thing to do, that this was a step that his brothers were ready to take. The other family was very, very hesitant, still very hesitant. They still call me on a daily basis, asking how they're doing. And so that's another thing to consider, is kind of not only balancing. That's another thing to kind of balance is, again, the families and the caretakers and how you're going to have to put a little bit of effort and support into that situation as well. And so we put this group together. The week prior to our first shift at the Humane Society, we spent that week with our job coach working with the two brothers on learning how to get from their house to the Humane Society on public transportation. And again, this was these were two individuals who had some prior experience. One of them picked it up very quick, and again, luckily we were able to couple them. And so the one that picked it up very quick, he was capable of kind of guiding his brother, who's also another client of ours, guiding his brother along public transportation to the Humane Society. And then once we got them prepared to do that for about a week, we shifted our attention to our other individual who was going to need much more extensive support on public transportation. And so the day of that first shift, our two individuals who were brothers got themselves via tracks and a bus to the Humane Society on their own. And then we rode along tracks and the bus line with our other individual who's hard of hearing, much more timid, didn't have any experience on tracks. We put all of our efforts towards assisting that individual in getting to the Humane Society. And then once we got there, again, similarly, two of our individuals required a little bit less support in that environment as they were kind of learning the tasks. And we were able to focus some of our efforts, or more of our efforts, on supporting this individual who had less experience in that environment, but still had this affinity and this kind of passion to work at a place like the Humane Society. And so that's sort of where we're at right now, and with our community engagement program and how we've been expanding recently, and how we've been going about expanding this program. And so now I wanted to pass this off to Brian, our Director of Development, and he is going to talk for some time about some of the issues and some other things to consider, some of the legwork that goes into this whole process.
Awesome, thanks. So, as all things go, there, okay, get that thing clicked on. I'm one of those people that really likes to be the center of attention, so I'm glad that there are three of you in-house to give me someone to perform for. But, you know, Kate gave us a great lesson on the awesome history that the Work Activity Center has had from the days of when there were no services to where we are now. And Cassie got the opportunity to talk about the great things that we've been able to do in the last couple years, and I get to talk about how we actually make some of those things work, talk about some of the problem areas, some of the struggles that we've had to overcome, and hopefully answer up front some of the questions that you may have, some of the questions that we know we definitely had in the beginning, but we just had to go with it. One of the things that I remember when we first had our first meeting where we talked about this thing they call transformation, and a consultant came in. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but as they were describing these amazing things they were doing, and I sat back in my chair and thought, wow, that sounds so cool. And I think it would be really beneficial to a lot of the people we serve, but I cannot even begin to wrap my head around how we could possibly even do it. Like, this is great, and it sounds like it's awesome wherever you're at, but there's no way we're going to be able to make that work. And a couple years now, later down the road, it's going, it's running, and it's doing better than I probably could have ever guessed. And one of the things the keys that I like to always give people when they ask about, well, how do you get started? How do you begin? What do you do? And the biggest thing is you just start. We had tons of planning and tons of trying to figure out every single problem that could possibly go wrong and mapping out what the solutions would be. And finally, we got to a point where we all sat around a table and said, okay, we're never going to solve every problem. We're just going to start on Monday. And then the problems will arise, and we will find them and solve them and go through them. And we did, and they did, and we have solved them, and some of them we have solved really well, and some of them we have solved enough to get us through the day. But the trick of it is that we're doing it really moving forward without really looking back, that we know that it's a better way to go. So one of the things that we get asked all the time is, how do we get parents on board? And this is something, and I'm going to use the term parents in a very broad spectrum, like you would use the word mankind. Like, parents are anyone in my mind who is a main caretaker, caregiver, asset, or friend to somebody with a disability who assists them with their services. So one of the things that we found in switching from a pretty heavily facility-based service provider to a heavily community-based service provider is that we had a lot of parents who looked at us like, what are you doing? Like, why would you even begin considering something like this? Like, we've come to you for years because we knew what we were getting. We got this safe and secure place that was going to, and it was great. And we found that change is not what these parents want. As I think about the things that we were going through, as we would present these things and the parents would come up with all the reasons why this wouldn't work, it came very clear that change is not what they were looking for. Like, they finally were settled. Like, we had everything taken care of. It was running like a clock, and messing with it is only going to bring chaos and problems. Why would we ever consider doing this? Really, a lot of the same questions that as a provider I had in the beginning. Typically, parents are going to want to maintain whatever service model they're using because it works. They know it works. They know what to expect. They don't have to think, well, gosh, what if that may happen? What if that may happen? What if that may happen? Those things aren't happening because they know what's going on. They have a plan of what they're moving forward. And we had to really stop back and think when we started addressing this to parents, I had thought after we went through all this planning that we're going to present this and the parents are going to stand up and cheer. They're going to be so excited. It's going to be amazing. Like, high fives around the room. It's going to be great. And that was not the case. In fact, not only was not everyone on board, we've had some parents who have chosen that we're not the right provider for them anymore, because we are really pushing to find that whenever somebody has more opportunities to be more empowered, to be more independent, we're going to push them towards that. And so it was an interesting thing of trying to figure out, after I left that first couple of meetings with parents, thought, what am I doing here? What am I doing wrong? Like, usually I can get people on board with what we're trying to do, but this is not working. And I had to ask myself, why don't parents want to change? Why don't they want this thing that, as we've sat and looked at it, as we've done the research, as we've talked with others, we know is a better outcome? And we found in talking with them, because the easiest way to find out what someone's thinking is just to ask them, we found is because there really is this fear. There's this fear that something bad could happen. It's the same fear, I think, that as school is coming up around the bend, and I have another child who's going to be jumping on a school bus to a new school by himself, and I have the same fear. Like, I know that when he's at home with his mom, all these things are going on, things are great, but once we put him on that bus, we lose all of our control. Going out into the world, other people are going to take over. And that's one of the things that we found that a lot of parents are really concerned about, is there's, in that area of sending people into the community to be more included in what they're doing, they're losing a level of control. And they're putting that control and that trust in the community to treat their individual and their person, their client, their child, whoever, as great as someone who's being paid and regulated to do the same thing. Because we know that when someone's going to a center-based program or a facility-based program, that they've been background checked, that they have best interests in mind. If not, they have supervisors overseeing them. They have people taking notes. All those things are happening. When we have a group of 3 going out to the community and embracing everything that's out there and participating in groups of 50, where 3 of them are people with disabilities in this group, 47 are not, there's that level of unease that can come up. And that as you change that, you have to talk with them and set up a system to make the family members feel at ease. One of the things that we get asked all the time, well, what if somebody gets lost? Well, then they get lost, and we find them. What if somebody gets hurt? Well, then we perform first aid and give them a Band-Aid. What if somebody doesn't like the activity? Well, then they don't like it, and we figure out why. And maybe it's because it's new and they don't like new things. Maybe it's because it's terrible and nobody likes it, but we have to suck it up and suffer through it because it's something that needs to get done. And once we start to set those systems in place, and we found very quickly that it was all about how we were presenting the message. That as we were talking with these people and presenting a message that wasn't more about, hey, we've made this decision that we're going to move to this point, and your person is going to be brought along with us, and really change the narrative to what was the truth behind the matter of, we found a system that can give people who want to be more included in their community this awesome opportunity to have this great, fulfilling experience. And as we started changing the message and started presenting it in a way that really made more sense, that really came back to the values of why we were doing it, it made people understand that this could be better for people where it's a good fit for them. One of the things that we also learned is that we had to teach and train parents on what is community inclusion. What does that actually look like? A lot of times, parents had this idea that we were just taking people on more field trips, or that we were going to go to the zoo more, if we were going to go to the museum more, and that, what's the benefit of that? And as we really explain to them the outcomes of what we're looking for, all those things that Cassidy talked about, the benefits that people are going to get that go far beyond just being in the community and being in a place, as we started to teach people about what does it mean to be an inclusive part of the community, regardless of ability or disability, that's when parents really start to buy in. And the biggest thing that we found is that once we got some parents that really understood what we were doing and really bought into it, then sharing that message and getting other parents on board was no longer our job, because that was now the parents' job. Well, not really their job, but they would do it naturally for us. So they were the ones that would explain what was going on. They would talk about their child. The individual, Todd, who we showed earlier, his parent is great. She's someone that her and her husband, both of them are great, that we can, when we have a parent who's maybe on the fence or a little concerned, we reach out to them and they shoot them a text and say, hey, I know that this is going on. I know you might show some unease. We definitely felt that way. We would love to talk to you and tell you more about it. And making those connections, because at the end of the day, we will tell people and they will believe us so far, but someone who's a parent or a family member or someone who's a main caretaker of someone, that goes beyond what we could ever do as a service provider. As we teach people, we find that we have to talk with, how we taught people is we started in that first initial meeting, typically in your annual PCSPs or annual meetings, and just start bringing up this idea that, hey, you've been participating in this great service and it's been a great fit up to this point, and it may continue to be a great fit, but there's also something else that might be a better fit. And as I identify those people where we can see naturally that they want to be more included in the community, that they want those experiences, we start bringing it up more. Sometimes it involves a trial period, and sometimes it involves a trial period where, like Cassie said, the parent is calling us every single night. And you know what Cassie's going to do? He's going to answer that call every single night. And he's going to be happy to do it. And he's going to be glad to do it. And they are never going to hear how annoyed he is they're calling him yet again, because he knows that it's right and that it's good. And he knows that this hump that people have to get over is the same hump that anyone going into a new system has to get over as well. And then once we help people transition into that and transform themselves, then they open the floodgates into what opportunities are available to them. It's our job to show them that we've covered everything, that we've thought of that. It's your job to think about what are the problems that are going to exist. And there are going to be lots of problems that exist. The problem is, people don't think you thought about them until they think they've only thought about that we couldn't have possibly thought that one day someone's going to get on the wrong bus. We couldn't have possibly thought that someone's going to trip and fall. We couldn't have possibly thought that someone's wheelchair battery is going to die, or that somebody who we typically assist in the restroom at our day program may also need assistance in the restroom in the community. And they think, well, of course they can't do that because you haven't thought of this. Well, of course we've thought of it. And so it's a matter of being ready to answer those questions. And then when we do have the ones that we've never thought of, because those happen as well, being open to saying, gosh, you know what? That's a good point. What do you do in that situation? Because we know that we don't send our individuals home and they don't just stay in their parents' house receiving programs at home until we see them the next day. They're out, active, part of their community. How do we ensure that they understand that we're just doing the same thing? Once we have the parents on board, then it's time for getting the rest of the group on board. So when we talk about stakeholder buy-in, that's the thing that can really help grow your community inclusion program or can really hinder it. And part of it is we always think about like three basic groups. We think about ourselves first because that's how we do things. Then we think about the person we're serving, and then we think about that first closest support they have. So it could be a parent, could be a family member, a close caretaker, and we forget about everyone else that's involved in making this program actually work. And so as you're identifying and starting your community inclusion program or growing it, to me, these are kind of the 7 items that I've looked at and that we've talked about of how do we, whenever we start new, decide how we're going to get stakeholders to buy into this. One, we have to identify who the key stakeholders are. And there's a lot of different ones in this type of a program. So one, we have, like I said, our individual. We have the first closest support system. We also could have, if we're providing a day inclusive program, your residential provider. And if those activities then start breaching the typical schedules that we have, then it becomes a lot more communication, a lot more integration with them. Other people we have are maybe friends. A biggest question that we have all the time is, what about my individual who's been going to the same day program for 25 years with the same people every day, has these relationships? You're just going to break those up? That's horrible. And trying to say, no, just because you go and do something else doesn't mean you have to give up all your friends. Like, if you move down the street, your friends are still there at the other street. You can just walk down there. If you leave a program, setting up ways to still engage them. And that's a big part of our community inclusion programs. How are we making sure those engagements and those friendships are still there? If we have dating relationships, how do we continue to grow those? How do we have friendships, things like that? The next thing we look at is learn what each stakeholder needs, what their stakeholder needs and requirements are. Each person has a different level of what they actually need from us. So someone at DSPD, which is our state agency, someone at a provider level, or someone at a family, all have very different needs for them to buy into the program we're doing. Finding out what that is going to really help you decide this next step of how do you engage them. Because how you're going to engage someone, we have some parents who really just want to know that this is happening. We have some people that like to do oversight with us who just want to know what's happening. And we have some parents who want to know every single day what is happening. What things are they doing each day? How is it going every single day? And those people need to be treated differently. If you take someone who really just wants to know what's happening and doesn't want any more details, and you start flooding them with the information of the minutia of the day in and day out, they're going to become sick of it really fast. If you have somebody who wants that huge volume of information, and all you're saying is, yeah, we started it and it's going great, and we have 12 people doing it every day, they're going to get frustrated really quickly too, and they're not going to buy into it. And the thing with this is we found is that everyone is a part of the process, and they all need to be there. When you transition to a different type of service, you can't just bring along half of the people that are involved. Everyone has to be a big part of it. And ensuring that everyone's a part of our process. We've found that as we've brought more people along, as we've engaged them more, they're more bought into it. The next thing I think is that when you're talking at different levels, explaining to everyone involved what the rationale is for transformation. Saying that somebody told you to do it is not going to give you any credibility ever. You have to have a reason for it. Now, the answer may be that somebody told us to do it. If somebody says, hey, you have to do it this way, or you're not going to get reimbursed for it, yes, you have to do it that way. If that's the only reason you're doing it, then you've missed the boat completely. You should be doing it because your mission requires you to do it. You should be doing it because you're driven to do it, because that's the work that we do. The next thing is to be explicit about the benefits of it. Do not hide or shy away from all of the amazing things that are going to happen. And then listen to and address all the concerns. Like I said, those are going to come up. And you can talk benefits all day, every day, until that one day where someone gets on the wrong train and they end up 50 miles away. And you could have said all the benefits, and everyone's super loving what you did, they're all involved, and then all of a sudden you don't know what to do. And knowing that these concerns exist, but you're going to address it, you're going to solve it, because you know what? It only takes probably once or twice for that to happen. And once you learn that lesson, you probably won't let it happen again. The next thing that I wanted to touch on is the Work Activity Center is a slightly different agency than a lot of agencies that are out there. I know there's a lot like us, but in our history over the last 61 years, we have really served a lot of those individuals that do have those more significant needs. As Kate talked about in the beginning of the presentation, a lot of our individuals use a mobility aid. A lot of our individuals have hearing loss, or are deaf, or could be blind, or have a more significant disability, or a co-disability, or due diagnosis. We've been serving that population for a long time in our daily programs. We know those needs. The 20 individuals that you talked about that need full care is also a different group. And in the beginning, we really did think, well, gosh, we understand how to do this with the low-hanging fruit. That's easy. Everyone could probably do that. But what do we do with those that have the more significant needs? We have been blessed with the fact that we've been doing it for a long time. We understand those more significant needs. We understand what it's going to take to serve someone in the community with these significant needs, because we've been doing it for a long time. The things that we found is that these people should not be shied away from. Now, if you're starting your transformation program and your community inclusion program next month, would I say find the hardest 10 people you have and jump off the bridge with them? No. They're probably not your first group. What I would say is don't leave them out. As you're starting with those that are going to be easier, that are going to be natural starts to it, in the back of your mind, think, okay, what if we just sat here at a train station and we all had a conversation about, okay, everyone's here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go jump on that train and go there. How would you have done that if one of your individuals was deaf? How would you have done that if one of them could not read? How would you have done that if they don't even understand what it means when you say we're going to go on a different train? And keep those things in your mind, because as you start in the beginning with those that are going to be easier to do, keep in mind that as you go down, you're going to have to plan around those that have more significant needs. Now, they can be a part of transformation, but it is going to come with some different concerns. You have to start negotiating higher rates of funding, because that is going to take more funding. When you're in a day program with a 1 to 6 group and you're now taking 3 people in the community and a couple of those have higher degrees of needs, you're going to need more staff. You're going to need a higher rate for that. You're also going to need to look at deeper and longer term planning. You can't just say, hey, we're going to go to the zoo on Tuesday. The zoo's easy. Like, we could all in this room go to the zoo right now if we wanted to. There's not a whole lot of planning around that. But taking what Cassidy's put together and planning out real, meaningful, long-term, inclusive activities that bind our individuals to those around them take a lot of planning. And as the person's disability gets more significant, those planning need to be a little more detailed. The next thing is the biggest concern that we see is the flexibility of service codes, because we're going to have on-the-fly problem solving. We're going to need flexibility with those. And I hope that whoever's listening who has something to do with this can take a look at that, because flexibility with service codes and how you do things is going to make this really blow up and go great. If you're hindered by, hey, you have structured day rates or things that don't flex or things that you can't move around, it really puts people back into a box. You can't do it. If you really want to be able to be fully inclusive in transformation, there has to be a lot more flexibility. And there has to also be flexibility on the agency. A lot of these agencies, ours included, we've been doing things for a very long time in a very specific, certain way. And so we've had to say a lot of times, okay, this is a little painful for us. This is not how we typically do this. We don't like to do this without thinking in advance, but we know it's the right way to do it, so we're going to jump. And so I think a few others need to do that as well. The last thing I want to talk about is, for the last 3 years now, the Work Activity Center and our subsidiary company, Covenant Employment Services, have been engaged with our School to Work program. And one of the things that's been really exciting about this is trying to find, how do we take our community inclusion program, our School to Work program, take the benefits of both of them and kind of wrap them around each other to give someone an even more meaningful life. If this gave us a really unique opportunity to start some of the transformation areas that we're moving to in the next year, kind of our phase 2. Because what we found is that in our School to Work program, the students that we're working with, they're already in kind of a group setting that's community-based. They're going out with their school programs, but they're using Discovery to do job development, and they're going out there looking for jobs. They're expected to do that, but also they're not going to the same place every day doing the same thing. They're out in the community. They're part of volunteer programs, work programs, lifetime enrichment, recreation, all those kind of things, different engagement. And so they're used to it. And so if you can build your program around where you have students that you're working with in the employment side, where you're finding them a job while they're in school, but kind of the rest of their day is taken care of by the school program. And then you can partner those together, that when they transition out of school, they have this amazing job that you spent the last year or so getting for them, doing great discovery to find this job, but then they lose everything else that's around them because they graduated from school. Having a community inclusion program really fills that gap that a lot of people are looking for, a lot of individuals are looking for, a lot of families are looking for, a lot of service supports are looking for, because then rather than students go from the school to a day program, which could be good for some people, but for some it's not. It's a shock to their system. They can continue to go to work, and then they engage in community activities that wraps around their work schedule. The cool thing about this is that a lot of the legwork has been done at this point. There's no more any parent buy-in because they already understand this. Like, they get that when someone in the high school program, they're working, but they're in the community, they're riding public transportation, they're doing different things. They have this expectation that's already there. The students and the individuals have that same expectation. They're used to it. They're used to going out and doing things every day. They're used to being engaged in their community. They're used to working, and then when I'm not working, I'm here with a couple friends, but we're with 50 other people who aren't our friends, and we're doing different things in the community. And so you have a lot of your legwork taken care of. If you can mirror and match these two programs together, it's really a great kind of solution for a lot of problems that you already see. Another cool thing that we found is that as you begin to build these programs, it does get easier. You know, it's one of those things that as in the beginning, as we thought about when we first set our first goals, you know, we set really high goals, and it's because we were ambitious partly, and partly we're like, there's no way we're going to do any of this, so yeah, we'll set a high goal that it's never going to hit anyway, so sure, we'll appease whoever's in the room and set a really high goal. As we went back and in the last year looked at those original goals, not only did we meet those goals, but we actually exceeded them almost in every key performance area. All of our indicators showed that as we were engaging in this, people's lives were better, they were more excited about what they were doing. Now, we didn't say everyone's in, and if you're not in, you're not with us anymore. What we said is, hey, you've been with us and we have this great thing that you've been doing, but we also have this amazing other thing that you could also be doing. And for some people, it's been great and they love it. Now, there are always going to be people that are hesitant to that, and maybe the day will never come where they want to be part of an inclusion program, and that's fine. That's why everything else exists. But while we have these great people that want to do it, these programs can be there. You know, why do we do this? Like, what's the purpose of it? And I think for the Work Activity Center, it really comes back to our mission. We were started by a group of parents in the late 50s who had kids, just like a lot of us that had kids, and the kids had disabilities, and they said, well, we want our kids to be engaged in the community, have these great things. Let's go out and find what's there. And the things they were looking for did not exist, so they started doing it. And as we've built and grown and continue to provide these services for the last 60 years, we've had that in the back of our mind that we need to always be providing something better than what's already there. Because what we have may be awesome and it may be great, and in most cases it really is. But there's always something we can be doing a little bit better. We should always be consciously engaged in providing a better service. And as we get more and more into this inclusion program, we found that the reason we're doing it is because it fits our mission. Our mission is to engage people and empower them to be more independent. And giving them the opportunity to be more engaged in the community just naturally gives them more independence. The last things, like in conclusion, there we go, is, you know, just jump in. No program or no initiative, no transformation, no pilot, whatever you're going to call it, is going to start perfectly. You're not going to have all the answers. There's no possible way to do that. You're not going to be able to plan for everything. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you're so sick of planning, you'll just stop doing anything at all. So any advice I could give is jump in. You know, do a little bit of planning, get some ducks in a row, have a few backup plans, and jump in and find out what you learn. You're going to find out more from that than probably anything else. The next thing is learn and adapt as you go. Don't think that you've set up the perfect program. When we set up our hub and spoke model, we thought, well, this is perfect. This fits our population. This is exactly what we need. This is going to be our gold star program. We're going to get better at it. We're going to keep running it. And then as we got a year into it, not even a year, 8 months into it, we thought, okay, so this is a great fit for these guys, but there's a whole segment of what we're serving who really don't want that. They want to go that next step. And so rather than saying, sorry, you need to fit into this model that we've built, or you need to go somewhere else, we said, okay, we need to adapt. We need to change it. We need to build it into something better. And the last thing I want to say is, you know, build upon the foundation you already have. Everyone that's here listening today, I hope, has an interest in doing some sort of transformation or some sort of community inclusion. Build upon that foundation that you've already built around whatever service you're providing. There's no reason to say, hey, what we were doing is separate from what we're going to do. Take what you're already doing and just make it better. Build upon the things that you have. Because, you know, one of the things that we found is that a lot of our population has seizure disorders, a big number of them. And that's one of those things that you kind of forget about when you're in it every single day, and, you know, they have either like a nerve stimulator or a medication they use, or it's, you know, oh, you know, John's having a seizure. Okay, someone watched John have a seizure and, you know, time it, all those things. And you forget like how shocking it is for someone to have a seizure in the community. You become a little bit like numb to it. And so thinking about, okay, what are the things that are unique to the population we serve, and how do we make sure that we're ready for that when it happens in the community? Because the first time that someone does have that seizure in the community, it can be handled two ways. It could be a huge spectacle that freaks everyone out that's around you, or it can be one of those things where it's like, yeah, this happens. This person has a disability, and part of their disability is they have seizures. And we know how to manage it. And then once it's over, we're moving on to something else. And that's the big part of it, is making sure that we are always remembering that we're just trying to bridge that gap. And the bridge, thankfully, between full inclusive people with disabilities is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The river's getting narrower, but it's still there. The gap's still there. The bridge is still there. And we're just constantly trying to make it more and more seamless. And so I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that the things, I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add after me. Hopefully you guys have gotten something out of this. I don't know if we have any questions. There are a few in the room, but there are a few online. I don't have them in front of me, so there may or may not be. And if there are, cool, but if they're not, that means that we just answered all of them.
Well, I have a couple follow-up things.
Okay.
This is Trisha. I think people will start typing too, but I do think you really covered a lot of the areas and the questions that people often have. I really appreciate you kind of sharing some of those examples of when things didn't go well, because I think that's what everybody is afraid of.
Sure.
But I also think right until you go through it, or you put yourself in that position, you don't know necessarily what you need to do.
Yeah.
Can you just speak to, in terms of the planning piece, because I know that's something that you guys have done a lot of, how often did your teams get together, and did that comprise of across systems, so your residential, transportation, as far as planning sessions? Was there somebody that took the lead? Those are the two questions I have.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, because I'll agree with you. Like, you don't think about the things that are scary that are going to happen, but don't let that be afraid either. Like, those things are just going to happen. Don't be afraid of those things. The planning, we went through our planning in a couple different stages. In the beginning, we started with a really large group, and we had everyone involved. We had someone from our residential team, we had someone from our day program team, our employment team, our operations team, our program development, everyone involved. And we found that it was great to get all of their input in the beginning. We found out from all those people, here's what I need in my department to help this be successful. And it was really good. And we found that those meetings with that large group of people are great, and they should probably only happen maybe 3 times. Because after the 3rd time, there's just too many people in the room. At that point, we decided we were going to scale it back and really focus in on who are the people that are actually running the program that we're doing. I know program's not a great word for it, but it's the word I'm going to use. Running the service. And so once we figured out what does everyone need and what is everyone interested in, and making sure that we actually think about, then we scaled it back, and now we meet, and there's about 5 people that are in the group, and we meet weekly. We meet for 1 hour each week, and we're really good about that hour. And there's some things around those types of meetings. One, you have to leave it at an hour, and we're really good about everyone says the hour's up. And you know, you hate to be the guy that's mid-sentence when someone else says the hour's up, because you know when someone says that, the books are getting closed, the laptops are getting shut, and everyone's just walking away. And we found that we're really effective in that meeting if we can hold it to an hour. Everyone's expected to bring stuff to follow up on. We're very tight about making sure that when we've asked for assignments, we follow up on them, because this is one of those things that community inclusion and transformation is so big. The way that we do transformation is going to be so much different for every single agency. And so trying to have somebody say, here's how you do transformation. There's no step of, okay, we've done step 1, now we've done step 2, we're on step 36 now, and when we finish that, we'll go on to step 37. It's not really how it works. It's a fluid, week in and week out process. And so we could probably hold an 8-hour meeting every Friday to cover these things as well. But we found that if we hold it to an hour, we focus everyone in, we force everyone to think of what's the highlights, what are the most important things, knowing that everything else is not as, if it isn't important enough to show up in your 5 minutes you have, or 20 minutes you have within this hour, then you can solve it somewhere else. You don't need everyone else in the room. But we found that making sure that we still had those every week, because there were times where we're like, okay, excuse me, this is running pretty smooth. Maybe we should only hold this meeting every other week. Maybe we could start holding this meeting once a month. It's really easy to do, because how many meetings a week do we go to? And so if you start shaving those away, think of all the free time you'll have to do other stuff. This is one where it's pretty sacred to us. We don't shave it away. We found that even when we decide to cancel it because half the group's either out on vacation or in meetings, we miss a lot. And as you're continuing down transformation, you need to really hold that time sacred. And we decided an hour. And for us, an hour works. In the beginning, it was a lot more, but I see an hour being probably the minimum we ever get to. And the people that we have in the room are an interesting group. One of the people that we have in the room is our development coordinator, so our person that actually does the fundraising for us and helps us think of, okay, we have these great funding streams that are given to us through whatever sources, but they are not fulfilling the needs that we have. They're not filling the gaps. They never will. That's just the way that it goes. As much as the rates go up, there will always be unmet needs. So how do we use development to fill those gaps? Now, development cannot run this whole thing for you. So do not think that I'm saying have a development person in there. They're going to find you all the money to run this whole program for you. You're not going to need any other sources of income. You definitely need all the services you have because, like I said earlier, it's more staff, more planning, more money. All those things have to happen. So you have to take the rates you have and then supplement them. Also, having that person that's not doing it day in and day out has some really good insights into things. They're the ones that can tell you, hey, you're looking at this really too closely. You need to look at this at a higher level, or you're only seeing the forest, you're not seeing the trees, those kind of things. And then we also have in that group our people that do our facility-based day programs. We have our person that runs our community inclusion program, but we also have our community employment person. Because part of this is a lot of these people want to be employed, and so how are we making sure that that's a part of it? How are we coordinating those that are in an employment setting with those that are doing community inclusion and that have maybe community inclusion plus they want to do part of the day program because of maybe a social aspect that they still haven't been able to figure out. And so that's how our planning process goes. It's never, in the beginning, it was definitely rocky while you're trying to figure out what it was, but if I could give you any advice, that's what I would set it at. And everyone's nodding along with me, so my group is agreeing.
Well, it doesn't look like we still have any questions in the chat box.
Great.
You guys are very thorough. Is there anything, I know that you guys are, Work Activity Center is a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how you communicated with your board? Because I would imagine that was a pretty big change as well in terms of that messaging.
Well, this is where I hand off the mic, because that's Kate's job to communicate to the board.
So, yes, thanks, Trish. Part of the way our board is structured, I feel very fortunate. Our board is very active, they're very engaged, and they're very interested in the Work Activity Center. And so what we do is we put different, we have different subcommittees of the board, and probably the most important subcommittee right now is our strategic plan subcommittee. Again, initially when we were rolling all this out and going through it, we were meeting monthly as a strategic planning group and talking through where do we want to go, how are we going to get ourselves there, what are the outcomes we're going for. And so we were meeting monthly with our strategic planning group. I mean, I do want to kind of back Brian up here on what he said. These meetings, don't underestimate how much time this takes. And if you don't dedicate time to it on an ongoing basis, it becomes very easy to let it fall to the side because there's so many other things just in the day in and day out running of whatever you have going on that this can get lost. So we had a strategic planning group. They were meeting monthly along with our internal group that was meeting monthly. We've since been able to back off the strategic planning group to quarterly now. So we're just giving them quarterly updates based on what we have been achieving thus far. And that seems to be fitting the bill in terms of the board. The board is much like parents. They're concerned about liability. They're concerned about whether or not the center is going to have enough sufficient resources to be running a bunch of programs that don't necessarily have all the funding they need attached to them. So the board concerns are much like parents. I listen to their concerns, we talk through their concerns, but we have proceeded in spite of that. And they're really quite happy right now with the way these community programs are been going.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions. So Sandy Smith said you mentioned that you had to request increases in rate to accommodate some of the smaller groups. What was your experience with that?
Well, we're just going through that now, Sandy. We've determined, we've begun to group our people in terms of, right, because you don't go from being a center-based to a community-based program in one fell swoop. It's not like you show up and say, okay, Monday everybody's in the community. That would be a sure way to not make it work. So what we've done so far is, as Cassidy alluded to, we've been watching how we pair the people that are going out to make sure that we have sufficient resources. But we have now reached the point where, frankly, without some rate increases going on, we're going to be having some struggles to get the next phase of people that we've identified to go. We may have to be creative. I don't know. We're basically dipping our toe in that water now. So we've determined who we'll be asking rate increases for. And ultimately, you are correct, that is not the Work Activities Center's decision. And we'll have to see how it plays out.
Okay. So Link had a question. What is your advice for financing these programs, especially in rural communities?
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. I think each community is going to have its separate set of challenges, right? Everybody says, oh, the urban has all the resources. You have UTA, you have all of these resources. For those of us who deliver services down here, in some respects, we long for having to deal with some of the rural issues, because I think you just deal with a separate set of problems. And so what I would say in the rural communities is, Brian or Cassidy, and I apologize, I'm not sure who was talking about this, if it was Brian, was talking about building the partnerships, probably both of them. Talked a lot about building partnerships. I think you have to build partnerships in terms of, think about your partners not only in terms of where can these people go, but who is out there who could assist them in going there. And again, don't think of this as I got to find a ride for everybody. There are some, and you saw our big map out there where we started by mapping where everybody lives along the UTA routes. We have identified that some of those folks have some significant challenges. We're going to be really challenged to find them ways to get there. So we're going to probably have to approach that a little bit differently. And as we go down that path, I'd be happy to share how we do that. But yeah, I don't mean to make this sound like, oh, it's not a problem. It is a problem. We just don't have all the solutions for it yet.
Sandy has a follow-up question. How did staffing, onboarding staff, and waiting for background checks, et cetera, affect the fluidity of your program?
Sandy, you're asking difficult questions.
I can answer that if you want. Yeah. So I can definitely answer that question. One of the things that we did to mitigate that is we knew that would be a problem. And so in our initial stages, we used people that we already had. And so that way we don't have to worry about waiting for a background check. One of the things that we've also looked at is making sure that when we bring staff on, we're not setting up a different expectation. A lot of people that we work with have maybe worked for another provider in a type of facility-based or day-based program. And when you bring them on and say, oh, well, your job's, you're never going to be in here, you're going to be out in the community all day, that's kind of a shock for them. And so making sure that as we're interviewing people, we're looking for those people that want to have that and want to do that. Again, we also still have to continue to make sure that we're teaching what's our mission, what's our vision, what's our goal. Because just because somebody, we don't see their face every day in our building doesn't mean we want to lose that either. And so keeping all of those things in mind, and at the same time, background checks will be what they can be, and we will put them through as fast as we can. And luckily, we've been at the point where we've been able to use staff that we already have, and as we are transforming individuals that we already serve, we no longer need as many staff in the building. As we put more people in the community, the staff go with them. Now, as we send smaller numbers into the community than what we staff, smaller ratios than what we staff in the building, we definitely are going to have to look at that. I know that, that lengthy background check is not an easy thing for a lot of companies, and ours included. And so it's not a problem that we've had to deal with head on. But what I would say is use the people you already have, use the resources you already know. That way you're not guessing, you're not waiting, you can just jump into it. And then hopefully by the time you get through that, we'll solve everything else.
Looks like Link is typing another question. Is there anyone here in the room that has a comment or a question?
I think as far as rural areas, they we do really need to find that software. I mean, really to, like you guys hit on that, really find stuff that's involved in their life. You might not know that they have that twice a year and that they really want to go to the zoo with them. So those are the things. Find out.
Said so Link had a follow-up question. How wide should you cast your radius for community-based activities? We often travel to find opportunities. So that's Link in Brigham City.
Yes, that really, I think, depends on the group that you're serving and what they're looking for. So we have some activities that are really close to where we're at. We have transit that's close to where we're at. So for our hub and spoke model, we have a train stop right next to us. We can use that. But then again, we also, one of the activities that our individuals really wanted to be a part of was in Park City. And so at that point, so there's some travel time in there. And so it's looking at, okay, do you want to be doing that all day, every day? Do you want to say, okay, first we're going to go to Park City, then we're going to go to Vernal, then we're going to go to Ogden? You know, you kind of have to plan out your day, but also keeping in mind that if you have a group that really wants to do something and they don't offer it close to you, you're going to have to solve, you know, and travel out there. We've tried to stay within, I would say, like a 10-mile radius of where we're at to get started. Now, as we begin more and more to having, you know, that's where we have everyone meets with us and then we go out. For those that are meeting straight in the community, that radius may grow because 10 miles from our main building, if it's 20 miles from us, but that's where everyone lives, it may only be like a 5-minute thing for them. And so that opens up your radius as you decentralize it and you set up these activities and these inclusion opportunities where people are already at. It really broadens what you're able to do. You're not constrained to everyone has to come here, we're going to group up, and then we're going to go there together because that does eat up a lot of time. Now, for when you are constrained by that, I would, 10 miles, 15 maybe would be the most for what we would look at.
So it sounds like, so what if I'm hearing you say, so you kind of started the hub and spoke where people were meeting there, and then you talked about the group that's kind of meeting at the Humane Society, and you helped them get there. So you are looking at pairing people closer to where they live and things that are opportunities Correct. Around there.
Yeah.
So like if you have 4 people living in Riverton, you're going to start looking at opportunities, and a staff person would be spending time.
Yeah, and as you look at, I'm going to blow backwards in slides for a second. As you look at this map, and wherever you're sitting, you may or may not be able to see this, but on the map you can see pins with flags in them. So we mapped out, and this thing, it's 8 by 11 where you're sitting, but it's the size of the wall almost where we're at. And what it's done is it's given us an opportunity to say, okay, where do people live, and how do we build a sense of community where they're at? Because if we can build what they're doing around where they already live, the rise of what their natural supports is going to be huge, because they're going to somewhere and it's in their neighborhood. They're naturally probably going to know someone, or someone's going to know them, and it builds that level of community where they're at, rather than saying, okay, you live in Riverton and we're going to take you to West Jordan's really close. We'll say Sugar House. The activity might be exactly the same, but they might not have those natural interactions they normally would have. They're not going to be familiar with the area. And so we're trying to take this idea and say, okay, where are people at? How do we build these activities around where they're at? Because also it builds their sense of, when do we start? Is there a potential where now they'll go out there with us for part of the day, but maybe they'll start doing things on their own in the community. They might not need us as much, which would be great as well.
Thank you. Well, we magically gone the hour and a half that we planned. I think we had some really good discussions and questions. Is there anything else that you guys want to add or follow up that you wished you would have said sooner? I thought you guys did a great job. Really just going through the process and covering everything.
I would say thanks for the opportunity to share what we've been doing. It's one of those things that when you do it almost in a vacuum, you forget that anything else is going on. So it was great to share what we're doing and to talk about it. And like I said, it's worked really well, and we've seen some great successes. So I would encourage you to jump in and try it. There's no reason not to. Like, what's the worst that could possibly happen? It's probably not that bad. So jump in and do it. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And if you have any questions, please follow up. I will be sending an email with the survey link shortly. So please take time to check that. Thanks so much.